This is the Church of Now podcast. We appreciate you listening, and our prayer today is that we can bring insight to help you become a better leader, no matter what generation you're a part of. So we're going to talk about sermons and sermon length and things like that, which is something that I've really toyed with over the last, I started speaking when I was 15. I'm 26 now, so I guess over the last 11 years. But before we get there, I want you all to know, and if you haven't heard yet, I wrote a book back in 2022, and it released on November 4th. It was my birthday. It's called The Church of Now, which really has to do with this podcast, and really that whole idea of we all have a part to play in the story. So you can go to Amazon. You can grab a copy there, maybe grab a copy for a friend. It's available there for you. So if you're interested in hearing a little bit more details than what you get on the podcast, you can go and buy that book from Amazon for, I believe it's $10 or $15 on Amazon right now. So go check that out. Also, if this is helpful to you, make sure you like our Instagram page, follow that, but also rate and share our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I want to talk to you all a little bit about sermon length. This is something that I've really wrestled with over the last couple of years of when is the right time to plan for your sermon? Like what is it? And to be honest, I remember going, I believe I was a sophomore in college. I went out to Malibu, California to Pepperdine University, and Jeff Walling, who was the legendary preacher and communicator, teacher, and pastor, he had this thing called the Next Generation Preacher Search, and it's still going on today. You should look into it if you're young. I believe it's for high school, college, and so you should go check that out. But he basically said, hey, send in a 5-minute video of you preaching a sermon, and then they select different people from across the country to fly out there and go through this preaching seminar for a weekend with a couple pastors in the area. And it was awesome. I got to go out there, and it was great. But I remember thinking 5 minutes isn't enough for a sermon. I grew up in an area where my grandfather was a pastor, and there would be those moments where he would preach for over an hour. And that's just kind of what I knew. And I never really preached that long, and I don't plan to. But it was just kind of interesting to see what Jeff had to say, because in my mind, I'm like, there's no way I can get it done in 5 minutes. There's a lot to say. But the argument is that if you can't do it in 5 minutes, then you might as well not speak any longer than that. You're not going to get the point across in an hour. And so do everything that you can in order to make it short, precise, so that people can understand the message. Now, we do live in a world where there's different denominations and different preferences and different styles of preaching, and different churches prefer 30 minutes, they prefer 45, they prefer an hour, or whatever that is, and your church service probably has a certain expectation of how long the sermon is supposed to be. Well, let me just kind of give you some of the points on why I believe that sermons should be short. They should be short. And so if you are at a church where sermon length is short, then maybe this is just a refresher for you. But I just want to make an argument, just throwing it out there. This isn't right or wrong. This is just my opinion. This is what I try to do when I prepare sermons, is try to keep it around 20 to 25 minutes. I know some of you are like, wow, that's really short. I'll even tell you a story here in a minute about a time that I spoke for 16 minutes. Think about it. Point number one, you're not a Netflix show. And I say Netflix, there's so many other platforms out there, but when I first thought of this idea, that was the really popular streaming service. And I think about Netflix, oftentimes, a show like Outer Banks or whatever your preference is around 40 to 45 minutes. But think about those sitcoms or those regular shows that were on TV even before streaming services. And I'll throw out an example like The Office. Those episodes usually run, I think, close to 23-ish minutes. And so what I've kind of said as a communicator is I am not as entertaining as one of those shows, and not that I necessarily need to be entertaining. The gospel is enough for that, but we also want to be smart in the way that we communicate it. We want to make sure that people are paying attention, and so if we go really, really long, then sometimes that attention is not going to be grabbed. And so we had to make sure that we do everything that we can to keep it at a length where people are paying attention. Now, I know people like Louis Giglio, Jeff Walling, Craig Rochelle, a lot of those communicators can go 45 minutes and keep your attention, but in my opinion, for myself, I don't feel like I can go that long and keep attention. And I wouldn't say that I'm the worst communicator of all time, and I wouldn't say that I'm the best, but I would say that it's just smart to keep it shorter, on the shorter end. No one is ever going to complain when you get the point across in 20 minutes or 25 minutes or less. Could be wrong. There might be people out there that would, but a lot of people are excited for that, especially at our church, because they get to go out and eat a little bit earlier compared to someone who may preach a little bit longer. I remember there was a moment where I was an interim youth pastor, or sorry, interim lead pastor at our church for about 6 months or so back in 2022. And this goes to point number two, attention span, which really builds on the first point. But I remember I was preaching and I was also doing youth, and I also had two interns, and there was a lot going on. We didn't necessarily expect the transition. So there was just a lot that I was doing in that moment. But I was preaching a lot on Sunday mornings, doing stuff on Sunday nights. When I was preparing sermons, I was, trying to hit the right length. And I remember there was this one Sunday, it was during the summer of 2022. There was one Sunday where I spoke, had it planned for about 20 to 25 minutes, but I ended up getting to my last point and I had only spoken for 16 minutes. And I was like, oh my goodness. Our church had previously been used to 30-ish, 35 minutes. And they always were excited when I preached because it was 20 to 25. But here was the moment where I was interim lead pastor and I was, responsible for preaching on Sunday mornings. And I had spoken for about 16. And, I sat there and thought in my mind, okay, what can I make up? What are things that I can do just to fill the time limit that is to be expected here? And you know what? I said, if I just fill it up, then I'm not really hitting the point of the message. I don't want to just ramble. In fact, what I want to do is keep it so concise that I could even preach for a minute and they could get the point across. And he'd lead people to the scriptures and what Jesus is trying to tell them. So I didn't ramble on. I said, you know what? We're just going to end a little bit early today. 16 minutes is that. And I remember coming off stage that day, being at the end of service and thinking like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have a lot of people that are mad or they're going to just think wrong about me or whatever it was. But I had a lot of people come up to me and say, thank you. Thanks for keeping it short. Thanks for not rambling on. We got the point that you wanted to get across that we saw in scripture was made, and we appreciate keeping it short. And it just kind of shows us, that attention span that people have, it just makes sense because we live in a world where, after 10 to 20 seconds, sometimes we're ready to go to the next thing. Think about as you're scrolling on your phone or people are scrolling on their phone. They can watch something for about a couple seconds, maybe a minute, and they're ready to go on to the next thing. Attention span is real. It's not just in our kids anymore. In fact, I typically do about 10 to 15 minutes when I'm preaching to our middle and high school students, and even that may be a little bit too long, but I do my best to keep it short. To point number three, it's this. Jesus typically kept it short. And that's what we see in Scripture. He always told those short stories, those short parables, to really just get people thinking a little bit. Now, there were probably moments where Jesus spoke for a really long time, but as I look at the stories and the parables of what Jesus is preaching in the Gospels, he keeps it very short and to the point. And so I believe we're supposed to do the same. Now, if you feel like you have everything going and flowing well in a long sermon, hey, go ahead. Again, this isn't a rule, but this is just something that I followed, something that I've learned over the last couple of years that I figured I would put out into the world just for you to consider. But Jesus typically kept it short throughout his stories, through his parables, as he was trying to help people understand through story on whatever the topic was. He kept it short, and most people in Scripture understood it or were able to even ask questions about it. So I want to give you permission. I want you to give yourself permission to preach shorter sermons. And maybe if you're a pastor and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know what people would think, go to your elders, go to your team, go to your staff and say, hey, I want to try something, and just give it a shot. See what happens. See how your church responds to it. And if it doesn't end up working out, then go back and do what you were doing. But I just wanted to throw it out there. I believe it's something that we need to at least give a shot at and try, because people's attention spans are a lot shorter than they used to be. And typically the shows that we watch that are 20 minutes or even 45 minutes, they keep our attention, but they are designed, very intentional, a big team working on it, obviously money and visuals and all those things. They're designed to keep our attention, but I believe that we just need to understand that we're not as entertaining as The Office. And again, not that we have to be, because the gospel is powerful, but again, if we don't keep attention, then people aren't even going to hear it in the first place. I want to give you one quick bonus tip. This is just something that I typically do in my sermons. Is I typically try to section off my sermons into 3 to 4 minute segments. And I didn't realize that I was doing this when I was doing it at first, but I've realized it ever since. But every 3 to 4 minutes, and sometimes it goes to 5 or 6, it just depends on where I'm at in the sermon, but I will switch up the pace of the sermon. Let me give you an example. The first 3 minutes, I may tell a story, and then I may spend 3 minutes in scripture, and then I may spend 3 minutes with another story, and that story could be an illustration, it could be a story from scripture, whatever that is. But I try to mix it up a little bit so that people don't get bored. If I've found that if I stick on the same thing for 10 minutes, then I feel like I've lost the audience a little bit. So just a quick bonus tip. I try to section off my sermons, and it's not anything that I get like really strict with, but I try my best. Okay, the intro's 2 to 3 minutes. The story is 3 minutes. The scripture that I'm going to be a part in is 3 to 4 minutes, and then I'm going to go and do something else and maybe come back to the scripture. That way we're getting people to go in different ways, different directions. If you watch any TV show that has multiple cameras, you will notice that those cameras switch every couple seconds, and it's to keep our attention. So, quick bonus tip for you. Give it a shot. See what happens. I would say, if that's something that you're interested in, try it this week, try it next week, try it over the next couple of months and see what happens. But hey, I appreciate you listening. Hopefully this is something that can challenge you, something that might bring up a question or two. If you are ever interested in asking me questions about things that we talk about, you can find me on Instagram, Matt_Mangrum, or you can go to the Church of Now podcast Instagram page and follow that and DM us, whatever you want to do. But hey, before you leave, make sure you go to wherever you listen to podcasts and rate it. And then also, if you share it, it really helps us out. So, hey, appreciate you listening. I hope you have a good rest of the month and a really good February. We will see you the last Friday in February. See you then.